Hi everyone. So my name is Pompa Baldi. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I've already met some of you and worked together. I look forward to talking to you a little bit about pedaling. And basically, pedaling is not something that can be specifically taught. Rather, what can be taught, I think, is a way of thinking about pedaling and how it can enrich what you already do or want to do. What is your imagination suggesting to you about what you are playing, and how the integration of all of the tools that we have in coordination with our own fingers, starting always from the thought process, can come together to create the sounds that we want. And so why is it so challenging? It's because there are infinite variety of modalities to use the pedals and to use the fingers in combination with the pedals. So first of all, before I delve into the topic, I want to say you may already know what I'm about to talk about. And if that's the case, consider this like just a little refresher, which hopefully doesn't hurt. And if you haven't thought deeply about or expanded on the subject, then the goal would be to just give you little grains of thought that you can then use to expound on as you practice and learn more. So definitely as pianists, we know that one of the most distinctive features of the piano is the Danver Pedal. It's what makes this keyboard instrument different than all other keyboard instruments. It enriches it to the point that it becomes a full orchestra. It's the most polyphonic keyboard instrument, with the exception perhaps of the organ, which I consider, or is to be considered, more of a wind instrument anyway. And so it is important to make full use of it. And I often find that students tend, and I don't want to generalize, but students tend to make limited use of the tools that our instrument offers. That's not to say that I find students do not know how to use it or use it wrongly. It's just that sometimes it stays a little bit too much on the surface and it doesn't go beyond that. And it can do a lot. So this is also with the technique of finger pedaling, which I consider one of the pedals that we have. So to my mind, we actually have 4 basic stops on our modern piano. The 3 pedals, and I call them stops, and I will get into that later. The 3 pedals, the foot pedals, and finger pedaling, which is the most discriminating of all the pedals that we have at our disposal, because we can pick and choose what to alter in terms of duration and how to combine it. And it may be complicated to really master, and I don't know if it's possible to fully master it throughout a lifetime of practicing, but it's definitely a lot of fun, and it expands the possibilities of what we can do a lot. But do you know, for example, if I asked you, well, we don't have time to really delve deep into the history of the evolution of the piano, but just as far as concerns the pedals, do you know which of the first mechanisms that we have currently on our modern pianos, we call them foot pedals, which of them came first? Or did they all come at the same time? Does anybody know? I think, why is it important to know the history? You'll see, because it opens up your mind to the possibilities and what we can do today compared to what they could do earlier. The soft pedal, what we call the soft pedal, came with the invention of the piano itself. It was a built-in mechanism that Cristofori put there, but it wasn't a pedal at all. It was a hand knob that you had to turn. And the pianos were double-strung, so there were no 3 strings per key. There were only 2. And so this mechanism would shift the action to the right so that the hammer would only strike 1 string, the left string. And that's why the name una corda, which means 1 string. Interestingly enough, this pedal was, still continued to be called una corda, even later when people started to triple string. But by then, we're already towards the end of the 18th century, almost a full 100 years after the first piano was built. And so when you have 3 strings, then the shifting of the action allows you to strike 2 of them. And did you know, well, you must know this, did you know that there was a time when you could actually, either by hand knob or even foot pedal, precisely strike only 2 strings or only 1 string out of the 3? So nowadays it's not so precise. You push the left pedal and you could maybe push it not all the way, and it gives you like approximately the feel of only striking, let's say, less than 3 strings fully, or 2 or then 1, but it's not so precise. But there was a time when it was. And that's why did I say that you should know this? Because Beethoven wrote it on the 4th piano concerto score in the 2nd movement, and also Hammerklavier. He actually has, in the 4th piano concerto, 2nd movement, a place where it says tre corde, or no, una corda, and then 2 corde, e poi tre corde, or tutte le corde. So 1 string, 2 strings, and little by little, all the strings. So that's something that we can't really do so precisely nowadays. And then together with this, there is a hairpin and a crescendo. So he really wanted to use this feature to help the crescendo along. And then a few bars later, same thing with the diminuendo. Maybe I can, you know, it's this spot here. When there is this biggest crescendo in the 2nd movement. That's where this happens. And then a few bars later, after, when you're playing this, so there it says diminuendo, and actually the exact thing is 2, poi una corda, diminuendo sin al pianissimo. So it's kind of an elaborate Italian way to say, just use 2 strings, then only 1, and go down to pianissimo. And I find fascinating that, and I have to confess, the first time I looked at the score, I didn't even notice it. I mean, it was there, I read it, and I just didn't think twice about why is he writing that. I didn't know that they could do it. They actually could, and we can only approximate it. Then there is the Danver Pedal. So when did the Danver Pedal first come about? This was already several decades after the first piano was built, and it was a German builder. His name was Gottfried Silbermann. He took what Cristofori had done and improved upon and continued to build upon. And he was also, I think, better at marketing, because then the piano, or maybe it just was in the evolution of things that it would take several decades for the piano to take over and become the leading keyboard instrument. But Silbermann certainly had a big role to play in this. Interestingly enough, both Cristofori and Silbermann didn't have to worry about money, because one worked for the Medici family and the other one worked for the King of Prussia. So they basically didn't have to worry about selling instruments or making money out of them. So that sort of freed them from that worry, and so they innovated more and they were experimental, and sometimes they failed miserably. But thanks to them, you know, something huge was started. Did you know that Bach tried the piano? You might know this, right? You know that he didn't like it, right? Apparently he really didn't like it. This was in the 1730s. It was at that point. He didn't like the sound very much, especially in the treble. And he didn't like the action because he thought it was too heavy. But did you know also that he actually tried it again later, and this time really liked it? And this was 3 years before he died, in 1747. And he actually, the King of Prussia, who I mentioned, was present there when he tried it. And the king gave him a theme, and he improvised on the piano, not on any other instrument. What we now call, well, a version of what we now call the musical offering. I mean, he then went home and actually wrote it down and explained, you know, created a full composition out of that theme. The theme was given to him by the king. But it's, to me, what's interesting is he improvised a 3-part fugue on the piano and really liked it. And it is said, and I don't know if this is true, but it is said by contemporaries that some of the latest keyboard, the last keyboard concertos that he wrote were actually thought of and performed first on fortepianos, the ones that he wrote in Leipzig late in his life. I say this just because it gives you a different perception, maybe changes your perspective a little bit when you think of Bach. Because so much ink has been spilled and so much has been said about, should we play Bach on the piano, should we not play? Bach was an experimentalist just as much as Beethoven was, and they were making full use of what the technology and the innovations gave them. And plus, some of the things that he had, we know for sure we don't have. Some of the things he wished he had, we do have. And so I think flexibility and open-mindedness are the key. So anyway, let's see. We were talking about hand mechanisms for these stops, and they were all activated by the hands until in 1765, I think it was Stein in Vienna, Andreas Stein, yes, who started experimenting with a different kind of mechanism. So I don't know if you knew this, but there was a time when the pedal was actually activated by the knee. And so that freed your hands. You now didn't need to have either stop and change or have somebody sitting next to you like organ players still do. You see them, right? The people just helping them with the stops. And that's what pianists had to do back then. Now this mechanism would free you. And incidentally, if I asked you, do you know who is the first composer among these three? Haydn, who was the oldest, Mozart, or Beethoven? Who was the first one to actually notate the pedal on a score? Huh? Beethoven, yes. It was the youngest of the three. And I find it so almost like it moves me to think that he was so young and yet so full of fire and so experimental, like I said before. And he wrote on a sketch in 1790 with the knee. So that means he wants the damper pedal activated. Well, it wasn't a pedal. Forgive me if I call it pedal. It just comes out naturally that way. But it was a knee mechanism. And do you know how many times or when Mozart started, or how many times he notated the pedal on his scores? He never did. But we know he used it because he even praised the mechanism on the Stein pianos that he tried. And by the accounts of people who heard him play, we know he used it. And Haydn started in 1794, and so a little bit after Beethoven. And the notation of the pedal changed as well. So the symbols that they used on scores were not the same right away that we are familiar with. So when did the stops or the mechanisms actually started to be pedals? That came just a little bit later, in the 1770s. And it seems that, we've started in Italy, then we went to Germany, then England. And it seems that it was one of the English builders in London, who incidentally had been students of Silbermann, one way or another, who started using the pedals to activate these stops. And there is, I think the oldest piano that we know is from 1772. We don't know if it was the first one, but it's the oldest we still have, from 1772. And I think the builder's name was Americus Bachers. And then there was Broadwood. Broadwood is a name that might resonate because this is a builder who actually gave a piano to Beethoven. We don't know if out of generosity or because they wanted an endorsement, but whichever reason, Beethoven seemed to really like it. And the pianos were getting robust, they were getting stronger, the materials were getting different and producing bigger sounds, and foot pedals appeared. But for a time, there was still a combination of foot pedals and knee mechanisms coexisting. There was a piano built by Nanette Streicher in Vienna in 1814. So we're not talking very, very long ago in the grand scheme of things, where there were two mechanisms activated by the knee and four pedals. And the mechanisms with the knee, they were called janissary or janissary, I don't know where the stress goes, pedals. And those are also known as Turkish pedals because they produce these percussive sounds. It's funny, the materials they use, they're very inventive to create these gran cassa and campanelle, and all of the percussive instruments that we know. The Janissary was an elite corps from the standing army of the Ottoman Empire, based in modern-day Turkey. So they had this elite military corps, and they had a band, you know, to make music, and they became very fashionable somehow. So they were used and paraded about everywhere. And so composers, you know, when Mozart himself wrote the Turkish March, but this was like a very common thing at the time. And the Turkish March itself could have been written having that in mind. Certainly was performed sometimes with that kind of mechanism. And a lot of contemporaries also used it and started writing with that in mind. And we don't have that, so we can still enjoy the Turkish March, but you know, unless you stomp your foot or find other ways to make noise, then you know, we're somewhat limited in that department. But so, do you know how many stops, how many pedals there are? I have to read this because then I forget the materials that were used. It's so imaginative though. There was something called the lute pedal that created a pizzicato type of sound. And then there was something called the moderator pedal or Celeste mechanism. It used a layer of soft cloth or leather that was inserted between the hammers and the strings, and it provided somewhat of a sweeter sound, a muted quality. This piece of leather was graduated so that, you know, depending on how much you pressed, then the rail would come down more or less, and the sound would be more or less muffled. And the moderator stop was very popular in Vienna, but a similar mechanism you can still find nowadays on upright pianos. I used to have one growing up, and it was a lifesaver because I had not very sympathetic neighbors. And so they, you know, it's still used nowadays sometimes to practice. They, you know, you can call it the mute or a practice pedal or something like that, but they called it the moderator. There was the bassoon pedal. Beethoven really made good use of that. Think of this. As the heroic variations, as played with this pedal, which you really can hear a bassoonist play this. So how they obtain this slightly buzzing noise that resembled the sound of the bassoonist, silk was placed over the bass strings. There was a cembalo stop that had leather weights that pressed on the strings and changed the sound to imitate the harpsichord. And then there was this is the most fascinating to me, because we talk about soft pedal and how to play softer. They had a swell mechanism. So a pedal would lift the lid or lower it. So you would project more sound or less. And some models even had like a square lid, so that there would be slits that would open or close. The lid could lift up or down, or could stay put, and the slits could open up and down. So some sound would escape, some more sound would bleed out. On modern instruments, you know, probably the closest to us innovation that came was the Fazioli F308 or 10-foot-1 that has a fourth pedal just to the left of the left pedal, of our left pedal. And what it does is it changes the volume somehow without changing the timbre, because it doesn't shift the mechanism. It has that pedal too, but this one just brings uniformly the hammers closer to the strings, so that when you press it, it can travel fast or slow depending on how you action the key, but it still has less room to travel. So it can be really much softer. There were also other pedals meant to modify volume, color, timbre, and special effects. I tried a lot of them in a beautiful place called Villa Giulini near Milan. They have this incredible collection, but there is many places in the world, and museums of course, that have collections of ancient instruments. I suggest, if you have a chance, if you haven't yet, to try and do this. There is also a beautiful place in China, if some of you is from China, on the island of Gulangyu, that has this incredible piano museum with a lot of old instruments that you can try, and models, experimental models, a lot of which have been dropped. They haven't been continued, but it's interesting to look at them. Then The last significant innovation, in general I would say, and when it comes to pedals, came in 1844. So we're talking already almost 150 years after the first piano was built. And this was the middle pedal, which has many names. I call it tonal pedal, but you can call it sostenuto pedal, or you can call it Cinderella pedal, because it's the Cinderella of pedals. Nobody almost ever uses it, and some students don't even know what it's there for. And so, but it was invented in 1844 by a French builder by the name of Boisselot. And some other French builders adopted it right away. It was shown at a French exposition, something like 1844, industrial exposition. It didn't take right away, but 30 years after that, Albert Steinway in the United States perfected it and patented it and marketed it. And then 2 years later, 1876, it was offered on all the Steinway pianos and most of the uprights, or the upper end uprights. And so then in Europe, they resisted it a little bit longer, but then it became popular over there as well. So I believe that, why did I tell you all this? I mean, as I said before, you may already know this, but it's interesting to be reminded of it. Because the more you know about the ancestors of the modern piano, the more you'll have an open mind when it comes to how to use the modern piano, I think. Your imagination should be unlocked. And somehow, when trying to be philologically correct, or when trying to be faithful to the score, for some people this has become synonymous of not doing anything that is not written on the score. And then this limits you in ways that I cannot even start to describe. Because some people say, for example, it's anachronistic to use a pedal that a composer may not even have had at the time, like the sostenuto pedal, the middle pedal. But then I tell you, and what about all the pedals they did have and we don't? So thinking that way, it might change your perspective a little bit. So let's talk about when to use the pedals. In my opinion, there is some discrimination about the way we use the pedal, just maybe consciously or subconsciously. For example, if you have a composer not write any marking about the damper pedal, would you say it's a fair assessment to say that you still use the damper pedal if you deem it appropriate?
Yes.
I agree, and I agree also that it should be so. Now, if you don't use the damper pedal, is because maybe it says senza pedale or without pedal, no pedal, then categorically indicated by the composer, we try to respect, should try to respect what the composer wanted. So we don't use it. And sometimes, but you see, my point is, because there are some pedals that must be written, because if a composer wants you to put the pedal only in that way and not another, they need to mark it, especially if it's really far from guessable. And you'll see later, I'll try to give you a few examples, but you're probably already thinking of some of your own. If it's not guessable and the composer didn't write it, how could you know? But we have this approach to the damper pedal. If it says nothing, it means we can choose how to use it. It doesn't mean don't use it, you know? But that's not true for the una corda, for example, because or let me give you an example about the damper pedal. You know, in the Sonata 109 by Beethoven, and this is just one of many examples possible, the first variation, there is no pedal marked. There is in the theme, but not in the first variation. So we all play that with pedal, but it's marked this way. And would you ever play it that way? It sounds silly. I mean, I even want to stop. But nothing is marked. It doesn't say to use the damper pedal, and yet we all do. And thank God for that. So, as I was saying, most students tend to be very mistrustful, I should say, of the left pedal, or maybe they are taught not to use it. And I know for a fact that in some geographical areas of the world, and which I don't want to mention because last thing I want to do is discriminate. And I also cannot conflate everybody together. But by and large, in traveling in different parts of the world, there are some parts of the world where this seems like by law, you must never use the left pedal. And I can never understand why. It almost feels like, in general, in my own country, in Asia, in America, it almost feels that for many people, it's like a failure when you use the left pedal. It's almost like I failed to play softly without help. So, but that's not the point at all of using the left pedal. It's, perhaps you can even go as far as saying that the point is not to play softly. The point is to change the timbre. And sometimes it is also to play softly, sometimes it's both. And, you know, so, but anyway, but I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't need to be told when we can use it. Unless it says, make sure you use all the strings, tutte le corde, or no left pedal, then you don't touch it. But if it doesn't say anything, it's always an option that you can consider based on what you're playing, the sound you want, the piano you're playing, the acoustical environment, and infinite other factors. There's no law that prohibits it. And then finally, if that's true for the left pedal, imagine for the Cinderella of pedals. As I said, some students don't even know what it's there for, what it does. I'm sure all of you do. But a lot of students, believe it or not, they don't know. You see a composer like Debussy, I'm thinking of, for example, but also many others, writing long notes in the bass that are supposed to be held down for a bar or two. And you see the harmony, and the hand's supposed to move 3 octaves higher, so you cannot physically hold it down. And the harmony clashes it too much because it's not in piano, maybe it's in forte. And the harmony changes too often for us to just keep the right pedal down, the Danver pedal down. And yet not a single student that I met, with very rare exceptions maybe, thought of using the sostenuto pedal there for a moment. And I'm like, if you don't use it there, where are you ever gonna use it? They seem to only wait until the composer just marks it on the score. And now, I mentioned Debussy because he knew that pedal. It's not something that was foreign to him. But as I said before, there were stops, there were mechanisms among the ones that I haven't mentioned in ancient times, or before the invention of the sostenuto pedal, that only allowed for the dampers to be lifted in one part of the keyboard. So if you have a bass note and you're supposed to hold it down, and the composer wrote it long, but then you physically cannot hold it, you can use the sostenuto pedal, because in ancient times, if you say, but that didn't exist, but they had another mechanism that only would lift the dampers for that section of the keyboard. So, okay. Yeah, that's an example of very long pedals. But so my point is, as I was saying, just think of what they had that we don't have, and you can find ways to approximate the effects that we're having. And then there is finger pedaling. Finger pedaling to me is an incredible tool because it takes all of these pedals that we have now, the ones we no longer have, with the exception of the percussion ones, and it makes it possible to selectively hold down things. And then sympathetically, strings will continue to vibrate, creating yet different effects altogether. Some of which might even go beyond what the composers intended. But if you don't betray the spirit of the work you're playing, I don't see that as a betrayal at all, or as a lack of adherence to the text. So obviously finger pedaling implies that you don't hold down notes precisely for the duration they're written. If you hold them down to be pedaled by the fingers, it means you just hold them down. And you keep them for as long as you can. And this changes depending on the span of your hand. Like if you can, for example, if you like to have an anchor in the bass, and you want that note to be long, but you want some transparency in the middle, and you want wetness, not dryness. So you can change the damper pedal, hold on, finger pedal the bass note, even if it wasn't written to be long. And then articulate it differently in the middle. So you create layers, you create textures, and you vary all of it. So it multiplies the possibilities, it expands them. So let's see, is there something that I wanted to say and I forgot? Yeah, so its ability to, the finger pedaling helps discriminate way beyond that of the single use of the tonal pedal or of all the pedals combined. And did you know that? Have you ever used two pedals with one foot at once? You have? Yeah, somebody has. You can use the left pedal if you deem it necessary there with the middle pedal by angling your foot. It's not terribly comfortable, but it's not like torture, and you get used to it. So the heel will press the left pedal, and the toes, or sort of the middle part of the foot, can use the middle pedal. It's actually very useful because you can still continue to use the Danver pedal and change it. That's something that I've done a lot. Now, I would like to give you a few examples. Playing, my hands have gone frozen, but I will try. So the examples are obviously very limited, and they couldn't be otherwise. And also, some of them only because, as I said before, you can have flexibility and freedom of choosing when to use what, when nothing else is marked. So some of this ties also into my personal taste and things that I would want to achieve, but somebody else may not desire. However, by talking about what I was trying to achieve and how I went about it, you could use that in other places. But first, let's examine a place in a Beethoven sonata that every one of us knows and perhaps has played, and that presents us with a problematic pedaling. Because over the course of the years, some have gone about correcting Beethoven's pedals when they thought they were either the result of his deafness, or the result of maybe him going crazy, or a joke, or any combination of the three. When what he was doing was absolutely remarkable, experimental, and brought pedal using to artistic heights that perhaps it had not achieved yet. So it's the beginning of the Waldstein Rondo. You know that we have this, and it's difficult because we have this long pedal that is supposed to combine, and by the way, I use the una corda too there. It doesn't say it, but it doesn't tell me not to. So, the risk there when I stopped is that if you lift the pedal too abruptly and you start not finger pedaling, then it sounds like everything has been like taken from deep underwater into a completely vacuum. No air, no water, nothing. Yeah, it dries, all of a sudden it's dry as a bone. So I transition from that long pedal into the no pedal, and I don't use the Danver pedal there, but because I try to achieve to continue. You have more transparency, a different type of sound, but without the long pedal. But so what was I doing? And again, perhaps this is something you played and something you already know. But how was I trying to balance the use of the Danver pedal for so long and trying to listen? Because that's the other thing, you know, with pedaling, you have to constantly listen. There is no way to teach it, I started by saying, because there is no way to schematically teach it. So how much you press down. In this case, for how long we know, but how much of it you press down and what you do with your fingers and how you layer and how you balance. And also there is something else. I am finger pedaling at the same time when I have the long pedal. And you may think, why are you doing that if you have a long Danver pedal anyway? Because you can have just enough pedal to keep a bass note, and then you release the pedal to the point that the bass note is still kind of gonna be there, but you know, you don't catch fully the resonance of the other notes. So they kind of stay, but they don't clash. And so it also depends on how the piano is, the pedal is graduated and how well it works, the mechanism. But we are starting under the assumption that we're working with a good instrument. And so then after that, any other adjustment you need to make. But what if it doesn't? What if you don't have an option? What if it works all or nothing or close to that? Then you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Well, you still have the option of doing this, like use as little as you can and rely on this. And just, this is what I was actually doing with my fingers when I was having this. So you can keep everything down, and this also forces you to play from inside the keys, from the second escapement. You don't release the keys until you have to replay them. So once you've played them for the first time, you hold them down, and so you have to time it right, because now I have to play it again. So I don't lift it all the way. And so this is something that you might feel not comfortable doing if you're not used to it. But if you get used to it, it also can work very well when you want an extreme legato in different situations when you cannot or don't want to use the damper pedal. So that's just an example with that. And then this piano, I have to say, is graduated okay, but not great with the pedals. So maybe I should try over there and see if it works better. It might or might not. But there is pianos that are so sensitive that you can actually have this note, and then you can actually, yeah, you see this? This works. Some of it doesn't work. It technically should, all of them should do this. So I should be able to keep that, and then this should almost like go away. Some of them do, some of them don't. So a technician would have its work cut out here for them. But it's nothing that can be fixed. It's just something that if they don't know themselves, you need to tell them. But so my point is, you can do a lot this way. And that's one, and you respect the letter of the pedaling because you still mix the dominant with the tonic. And you sort of bring it into modern day instrument, which have such a big sound. It's so tough to control the volume when you have the pedal fully down and when you also pump your fingers instead of staying inside and playing from the second escapement. So that's one way to go about that. But there is other ways, other moments. For example, even from this same piece, I want to show what I feel I want to do. I want to avoid, this is not a word, I'm making it up, fingeriness. Or being too digital with the finger articulation, or passages like this. Now you might say there's nothing wrong with that, I like this. I personally don't. And I think that's a place where I would, if I had it at my disposal, I would use the damper pedal for the bass section only, and I would do this. To a certain extent, to try to finger pedal the bass. And then you have other places where, for example, here, I want this Marshall quality to the left hand, so I don't want to drown it in pedal. And you could use short pedal, I guess, but I like to bring out the polyphony by just finger pedaling the melody, which is this. And so everything else is more articulated. But I can keep this sort of shortness or separation of the syncopated notes. This is just a small example. Then there are other places where I want to go from totally dry and totally articulated like this. I do want the left hand to be very sharp there and very dry. But then I want to change when I get here. But I have staccato, and I don't want to drown it like this. So what do I do to release? I don't want to release it too sharply, but what do I do to release this? I can, while I lift the damper pedal, I substitute it with finger pedaling. So hopefully the goal is to be so smooth between the two that you don't hear the difference. And you hear the articulation in the right hand, and it goes from being completely pedaled to completely unpedaled with no difference. And so, etc. Then there is the always difficult, very low register, murky passages, where it's like supposed not to be too articulated. I think it's not supposed to be, because to me, when people play like this, it sounds like a beginner's Czerny etude on steroids played by a double bass. So I like to avoid that as much as possible and to keep the murkiness of it. So I don't want to hear everything precisely, yet I want all the notes to be there. Something like, I don't know if I can do it well, but sort of imitating. So I'm staying as much as the piano will allow me. Where you can hear this little 4-note scale in that low register, keep it as soft as you can because you won't inflate the sound with the Danver pedal. And it will still have some clarity, but it will be extremely legato and murky, as I said. Beethoven has many more pieces. You know, think of Tempest Sonata, Appassionata, Opus 101, some passages in there, and many more where, you know, you can, it just demonstrates how much experimentation there was in his music, and it reminds us of how the evolution of the instrument was constant at that time, and he was perhaps even driving it rather than just witnessing it and then starting to make use of it. In some instances he was actually pushing the envelope and asking builders to try and give him an instrument he could use the way he wanted. But what about this type of situation when you have a romantic piece where you could say you could use a lot of pedal anyway because you feel that you have a free license to use it, like in Liszt, for example, sometimes. But when you have passages that are similar to that in that same register, and even when he marks it, should you make full use of the damper pedal? Like, for example, just a small example in Dante Sonata, when you play this, there is a moment where if I go with the full pedal down the way it's written, and for the length that it's written, to me, it is almost unplayable. It's supposed to be basically triple pianissimo, and it's supposed to be perdendo, so like disappearing, and yet it's like here, it sounds like a hardware store, where there is so much screeching metal making noise. And so when you play this, right here, but what if you use a combination? If you are able to smoothly go from pedal to no pedal and substitute with finger pedaling, or even do away with the pedal at all. So if you play, maybe this is too extreme, you might say. I don't want this, it's too dry, although everything was legato. Well then, go back and insert some pedal, and then you can change it depending on what you want. Now, if you might also be fine with the first one that I played, you might say, I like that, then fine. But it's an option. But there's no way to have options if you don't like combine the different pedals. And I was talking about keeping long notes down when they are either written or intended to stay down. Like, for example, in Chopin's second piano sonata, in the Funeral March, you have this moment where he wants a full pedal per bar. And I don't want to contradict him. I think the reason that he was doing that is because he wants the bass to stay. I don't think he was particularly keen on having these chords clash together. I think what he wants is this. So yeah, you could say, well, you could find a balanced sound. I could try and maybe use the Danver pedal the way he writes for a whole bar. And maybe it's something that we could stomach. Although I think it worked better on his piano. But what if I do this? And then to some people, maybe I'm doing something that is not faithful to what's written, so I'm wrong. I don't think I am. And I don't think there is right or wrong. That's what I'm trying to say. But my whole point is there is the option of using, for example, this sostenuto pedal, which I'm sure Chopin didn't know when he wrote this piece, because it probably didn't exist yet. So that's another example. Example of virtuosity, speed, and softness, and combination of extreme legato and clarity in the last movement. When you play this, so I'm changing the pedal very often, but what I'm trying carefully to avoid is this. But this is what I'm doing. So what do I do when I lift the pedal? I finger pedal the left hand. So I'll do it slowly. So it doesn't inflate, it doesn't lose clarity, and you can do combinations of this, or you can decide for how long to finger pedal and for how long to lift the right pedal or put it back down. So it just gives you more possibilities. And when it comes to pieces that are so symphonic, they are like transcriptions, arrangements, or like, for example, the Bach Busoni Chaconne. He takes a piece from a monodic instrument and turns it into a huge cathedral. You can think of a full symphony orchestra or a huge pipe organ in a big cathedral. And for some of these pieces, like this one, I think having flexibility and using all of the arsenal of tools that we have is very important. Nothing can help you more. For example, and here there's actually a literally long bass notes sequence but there is nothing marked. Busoni does not write that you should use the middle pedal, although of course he knew it and had it, but he doesn't write it. But when you play this, if you want to keep the bass there, again, maybe this is fine, but there is also this, and I like it better. Because that way you can also have the rest in this voice, and you can have more of a speaking voice in the middle, because each note can be like spoken more clearly that way. Then here's an example of using both pedals here. I want the left pedal here, and I also want the middle one. So I stopped. I don't need to stop, because if you stop, you give it away. I just wanted to show you where I changed it, but you can use the both pedals, and it might look a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not. It depends on the shoes you wear. Already? But 10 minutes?
You're talking about stopping.
But I thought I had until 4, no?
We have to change, though. We need to go into your coda.
Okay. Well, I'll leave you with one more example then, and that's it. There was a passage that baffled me for the longest time, because it has scales and it's supposed to keep the bass. And in all of this, you have to suppose sempre staccato. So even just using the tonal pedal wasn't enough. You have to use a combination of everything here. So, but the problem was where to use it, because I needed to catch an A. And the first A, if I catch it where it's written, long, then I have to stop. I have to give it away. I have to, somehow music is not natural if I do to catch only that note. And there is no way to time it unless you really expand the timing of that. And it doesn't work that way, because actually the cadence is before. And then it's supposed to. But I want to keep the A. So where am I going to catch it? I made an arbitrary decision. I'll be the first one to admit. It's nothing that tells me that this note where I catch it should be long, but it's only 1 bar before. And the pedal point starts there anyway. So. And then I can keep it forever. I don't have to change it anymore. And even especially here when the passage, the scales. And we have to stop. But anyway, I hope that this was useful in any way. Thank you.